Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Alan Bird, and I work for Chambers for Innovation and Clean Energy. And we're welcoming you today. We have a very special kind of quick talk here today with State Senator Jason Brodeur. As everybody knows, the legislature ended its session at the beginning of May. We had some very good wins in conservation, sustainability, clean energy, and resiliency. And we're going to have a little bit of a conversation on that. But first, I'd like to introduce one of our co-hosts who is helping us with this meeting today. His name is Ben Balloon, which is, and he is the chair of the Lake Economic Area Development Partnership, a new organization that is doing some great things in the Lake County area. He's also president of Optimus Energy Solutions. Ben, if you could come on camera and just share a little bit about what you do. And again, I'm sorry, I tried hard to not butcher your name, but I knew I did it anyways. Maybe you want to say your name again, just in case.
Hey, thanks, Alan, and thanks, Senator Brodeur. This is Ben Balloon. The organization is called LEAD, Lake Economic Area Development. The reason we felt there was such a tie-in to what you all are doing specifically on this brief call is we're trying to exemplify partnership. So it's the first time in our region that we've had a true public-private partnership between the county, private business funding, and over half of our cities within the county. And then further, we've done a partnership with Marion County, Ocala, to continue advancing a number of initiatives. One of those that we're specifically interested in working towards that we have been actively in Lake County is the agri-tech sector. And a lot of the existing businesses that are here, growing them, providing the resources to those businesses, as well as attracting others, which clearly has a tie into some of the things covered and Senator, some of his background. And then lastly, before I turn it over to Alan, is I personally own and operate Optimus Energy Solutions, and we serve about 15 or 16 cities and counties currently in Florida with electric vehicle charging infrastructure, procurement, installation, et cetera. And so, we've been sort of tooting the horn of low operating costs for electrified transportation for a long time. So it's a very interesting topic to us, especially when you get into municipalities that run their own utilities and how keeping that money here close to home creates a real virtuous cycle for residents and others. So without further ado, Alan, I'll kick it back to you and say thanks.
All righty, thank you very much, Ben. And now let's get busy with what we all came to for today, is to listen and hear from my friend Senator Jason Brodeur. Of course, it being the Chambers for Innovation and Clean Energy, we're very excited to have him because he's certainly no stranger to the chamber world. He was the president and CEO of the Seminole County Chamber for almost a little bit over a decade. Did some remarkable work there, but now he is doing some absolutely phenomenal work for us as the chair of the Appropriations Committee on Agricultural, Environment, and General Government. And that's a mouthful. So why don't you share a little bit about what chairing this committee has done and the sorts of things that go through this committee to get into the budget. Jason?
Thanks so much, Alan, and thank you for having me at this event today. It's a great chance for me to talk a little bit about what we've done this year and what we get a chance to do. You're right, the chair of Ag, Environment, Natural Resources, General Government sounds almost like a little bit of a catch-all, and to some degree it is. The Ag and Natural Resources and Environment part is kind of self-explanatory, but in Florida, every state is organized differently. Every state constitution makes its own choices about when it goes to session, how many Supreme Court justices it has, how many members of the legislature. And part of what we've made choices on is what sectors or silos of government we have as committees in the legislature. We have healthcare, we have education, we have justice, and then we have transportation, economic development, and everything else. And so as chairman of a committee on general government, you think, well, that's kind of a little bit of a catch-all. But in reality, that's the Department of Lottery, that's the Department of Revenue, it's the Department of the Office of Insurance Regulation, it is the CFO's office, it's the Attorney General's office, it's the Governor's office, it's the Department of Management Services that does rental cars and leases and buildings. And so not only do we get a chance to weigh in on things like the environment, the Everglades, the Indian River Lagoon, the Caloosahatchee, blue-green algae bloom, you name it. It's also this other sector that's everything except healthcare and education and justice.
Great. And of course, Florida Wildlife Commission and some of the other stuff is under there as well. Since we're talking about wildlife, let's talk about one of the big priorities. It was a very large priority of the Senate president. You got it accomplished the Florida Wildlife Corridor. Can you talk a little bit about what was in that bill and what does it mean for the future of Florida?
Sure, and thanks much for an opportunity to talk about it. It was a priority of the president, but a legislator has to run it, and so I got the chance to carry this piece of legislation. And what we have done is something that has never been done in America before, at least according to Pew Charitable Trust, who's written a big article about it. And that is that we have worked in cooperation with private landowners to set aside 17.7 million acres in Florida to preserve a wildlife corridor for our apex predators, our Florida panther, our black bears. One of the things that happens when we build roads and we develop like we do is that if we do not allow for these large swaths of corridors of uninterrupted land, or at least land that doesn't have walkways underneath it or elevated spans so the wildlife can move, you end up getting a lot of interbreeding within the family, and the species dies out faster than it would from other extinction events. And so by us allowing for corridors that move from South Florida all the way up to the Panhandle, we're going to at least give a better chance, if not ensure, the survivability of our species like the panther and the black bear. So what we did was we partnered with local farmers who are under tremendous pressure to sell out to Pulte and Miranda and all these home builders that are, I mean, right now it is boom time in Florida yet again for probably the 15th time in its history. To say you don't have to sell to a developer. We will buy part of your land in perpetuity. As long as you grant us this easement for a wildlife corridor, you can continue to farm without worrying that you and your family are losing out on what kind of money you could have had in the future. This agreement, like I said, is the first of its kind, has allowed us to be able to set aside acreage that could allow a species like the Florida panther to move from the Everglades all the way up to the Panhandle without worrying about getting run over. And that's going to be a big difference for us. Now, when you have that kind of acreage, the question becomes, what do you do with it? I, ironically enough, as the ag chair, was never a fan of the Florida Forever program because historically, that's the program where the state would buy a bunch of land. Well, over time, Florida owned more land as a percentage than any other state owned of its own land. It was taking it out of circulation, and we weren't doing anything with it. It'd be different if we had turned it all into parks or we could recreate on it of some kind. We just weren't doing it. Here, this year, with this bill, we have allocated $200 million for the Department of Transportation to build a non-motorized trail, so a 10-foot wide path, walkway, from Naples to Orlando that has other sections. So you will be able to ride a bike from St. Pete to Titusville. You'll be able to ride a bike in a giant loop from Flagler down to Seminole County and around. You'll be able to ride a bike from Pensacola to Jacksonville, and it will all be interconnected. This will become the premier eco-tourist destination, I think, right behind or on par with the Appalachian Trail. And so as we continue to commit ourselves to making sure we preserve Florida's wildlife, preserve Florida's ecological history, preserve our geologic differences that we are having, that we're on an aquifer and we need to protect our recharge areas, this is going to ensure for generations to come that we become a global destination and we protect all the flora and fauna that's made Florida what it is.
Well, let me, that's an interesting thing because we have chambers on this on this call, and some of these chambers are adjacent to that wildlife corridor. What should they be telling their members to prepare for the economic impact? And one of the other cool things about this is it really does show how businesses can embrace conservation and still use the conservation efforts that the state is doing to help improve their economic impact.
It's a great question. And really one of the things the bill did was specifically call out the notion of trail towns in Florida. Very minor section of the Department of Environmental Protection that recognized these towns for whom they are just adjacent or right off of the pathway. And they don't have to be true trail towns as much as they have these characteristics that allow chambers and towns to take advantage of the traffic that's going to come through there. Now, this is a non-motorized trail, so it's going to be bikes and walkers and joggers and that sort of thing, but they're going to need water, and they're going to need ice cream, and they're going to need an Airbnb, and they're going to need some place to pump up their tires, and they're going to need all this stuff along the way. And so we're not talking about building cities on these towns, but we are talking about providing services. Businesses, small businesses can provide services for these folks who are taking advantage of this, particularly those who say, I want to spend my 2-week vacation going from Naples to Orlando. That's a lot of land in Florida where there isn't anything right now. And so there's tons of opportunity, particularly for our more rural communities, to be able to provide services and start to establish businesses along the way that are going to help attract not only to the corridor, but have those folks who are using it be able to provide economic development to those areas.
Fantastic. One of the let's switch on to another bill, because one of the bills that we were very much appreciative of your efforts on and getting this thing passed was your energy bill and the effect it can have on the EV market and allowing states. Can you just give us what that bill did in a nutshell, and kind of why was this important to you? Because you worked on this for a couple of years.
Yeah. So oddly enough, but part of the one of the agencies under my purview as chairman is the Department of Management Services, which is responsible for our fleet vehicle management in the state of Florida, tens of thousands of cars and that sort of thing. And it was brought to my attention. This is one of those things you don't really realize the law until somebody just says, "Did you know we do this?" And you go, "No, I had no idea we did this." Is that in order for us to buy vehicles, we must be responsible about it. Makes a ton of sense. We're spending taxpayer dollars. But as part of the calculation we were using, it was in statute that you had to use a miles per gallon calculation for cost efficiency. Well, as we migrate to not only electric vehicles, but those that maybe run on liquefied natural gas, some other kind of fuel, there's no miles per gallon metric. And so if you put a zero in for the equation, all of those vehicles grade out at zero and can't even compete. And you may say, listen, we know electric vehicles a little more expensive to start, but the maintenance costs are so much lower that why don't we move to a lifetime cost for assessment? And so that's part of what this bill did this year was we changed in statute that as the state looks at how it's going to procure vehicles, the cost component was going to be on total cost, a lifetime cost of the vehicle, not just some efficiency metrics or the initial upfront cost, because all the other kinds of vehicles that are coming along would not be able to compete with what we call an ICE car, an internal combustion engine car. And so that now changes this. But in addition to that, the bill also makes recommendations or makes mandatory that the Department of Management Services make recommendations to universities and municipalities. So we've got 480 municipalities or so in the state of Florida, more than a dozen universities and state colleges. And so as they do this analysis about what is going to be the lowest cost vehicle, they're going to be pushing that information to all of our cities and counties and all of our universities and colleges. So that way, everybody understands that this year, if you've got to buy a dozen or 2 dozen or 50 vehicles, this is what the state will tell you is the lowest cost option for you.
One of the things, and we'll talk about the downside. One of the things that was that was taken out on the House side was the permitting for solar and permitting. Talk about what that was supposed to do, and is there anything we can do on our side to help you with that and the issue next year?
Sure. So in Florida statute, we have a couple of different kinds, Department of Business and Professional Regulations regulates our contractors, those who build, you name it, commercial, residential, et cetera. But within our statutes, we have what are called single source or single use contractors, which allow for expedited permitting. And so if you do roofing, if you do HVAC, if you do plumbing, there are certain kinds of contractors that's all they do. And so they don't have to go through a general permitting process at the local level. And so you can imagine how much easier it would be to permit for either a electric vehicle charger or a solar panel if solar contractors had their own single permitting. They didn't have to go through the general permitting process. And so part of our bill said that we're going to, in addition to these half dozen other kinds of specialties, add in electric vehicle or solar contractors so that they have expedited permitting at the local level. There's nothing more frustrating when you're trying to do a project than to be all buttoned up. You've got your engineering done, the architects are done, and you're waiting on the county to issue a permit because they're getting all wrapped around the axle on exactly who's supposed to review this and what they're doing. So we were trying to make it a lot easier for solar contractors and electric vehicle contractors by isolating them to this single use. The House didn't like it. And so, like I said, this is the third year that we've tried it. And so I think next year, if we file that as a standalone bill, that'll then help highlight some of the reasons to do it, not the least of which is accelerating electric vehicle charging stations around the state.
Is there anything that we can do to help you?
I think one of the things that's always helpful is to contact your local member of the House or member of the Senate. You know, we all get various bill ideas or push from a lot of different sources. Sometimes it's lobbyists, sometimes it's reading the news headlines, and most of the time it's constituents. You know, my parents are still my constituents, so my mom calls all the time and gives me ideas, whether I want them or not. And so there's a number of different ways, and the degree to which you hear something over and over and over, particularly from individuals who are giving their own personal story. One of the least effective methods of advocacy, at least for me, is a chain email or mass texts, or like, I know what they are. As soon as they come in, they all get dumped into a junk mailbox, and I never see them again, because it's the same subject matter, it's the same everything. And we're at a time now when you can automate those 500 things. I don't need them clogging my inbox. What really helps is if you just write me an email, like you're talking to me. I read every one of those, believe me. And so to be able to tell your story about how this would impact you personally and how it is that you would work. And these are your local members. So remember, at the state legislative level, we all live in the community. So if you tell me, hey, listen, this is the intersection I want to do work on, I've probably been to that intersection this week. So it's not like you're just writing into some dark hole of somebody who's never going to read it. It really helps to have that personalized story.
So is there anything in the House that we need to do to fix to get the House to like it?
Well, next year is going to be the second year of a 2-year swing. Our legislative cycle is generally everybody stays in the same spot for at least 2 years, because that's our election cycle. And so we may want to figure out who in the House was the issue, start with the sponsor of the legislation on that side and ask them what the problem was, and then work the members from there as we go out. I think that's probably the best way to do it, to figure out where the stick in the bicycle spokes happened.
Fantastic. So one of the things, let's move to water a little bit, because one of the things that we've been dealing with here in Florida for so many years is the sewer to septic and programs. And you did some work on this right now in this legislative session. Can you talk a little bit about what happened this session in that program?
Sure. So as science advances and we get a better idea of what a failing septic system does to our environment, we end up leaching out macronutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus into the water table. That gets us an imbalance, which causes algae blooms, and that's what jeopardizes tourism and our water supply and manatees and seagrass. Just go down the list of how bad that is. And so we want to stop that from happening. And we realize that all these programs we do on remediation, we wouldn't have to do if we just stopped the macronutrients at their source. And so part of what we've been doing as the science evolves is trying to get folks from septic systems, or I should say failing septic systems, onto sewer. And the place we should do it fastest and most is right next to critical water areas. And so we have what are called BMAPs in the state of Florida, which are our basin management action plans. Those are the places that we have mapped out that when rain falls in Florida, you can't really tell it where to go. It just goes where it goes. And so with as many lakes and rivers and streams as we have, it helps to know that if rain falls on this piece of land, where does it go and what is it dragging with it when it goes to its bigger water body? If it's dragging it across your backyard and you have a failing septic system, that's bad. And so what we're trying to do is make money available for those municipalities who want to assist homeowners to get a failing septic system, either to an advanced septic system, which removes more than 65% of the nitrogen and phosphorus in the tank, or better yet, let's just get the whole neighborhood on a sewer system and pipe it way away from there so that we don't have any issues going on. We have 9 different programs within the Department of Environmental Protection, depending on where you live, for your municipality to apply to the department and then get a grant to help pay for transferring those folks either onto advanced septic or onto sewer, so that we don't have to worry about getting on homeowners every 5 to 10 years about cleaning out your tank and making sure it's not failing and doing an inspection. Those affect real estate prices. Homeowners don't want to do it. It's money out of pocket. Let's just fix the program. Let's just fix the problem permanently.
Fantastic. Speaking of water quality and leaching into the lagoons, there was a lot of money in the budget for both the Indian River and Mosquito Lagoon. Talk about how that's going to be used, and also if there's anything else in the budget that kind of sticks out in your mind as to, hey, this is a good program that all of us should know about. Yeah,
so part of what we wanted to do was, we're always hearing about the manatees, and the manatees, believe it or not, we do not really, and this is part of the second part of the question, which is something we highlight. we don't have a very good system for counting manatees. We talk about any other species, and there's people out there with like radar guns and collars, and we're pretty accurate on this stuff. We count manatees with some guy hanging out a plane at like 3 PM trying to count backs of it's just not like a giant priority. And so this year I said, hey, can we get like a really scientific way to do this so that we have an idea of exactly what some of our environmental policies are doing to these things? We could have 3 times as many as we think. We could have half as many. Maybe they're double counting. I don't know. If you count at morning before boats get on the water, and then you count in the afternoon, you're going to see more in the morning than you see in the afternoon because they're low. And so we are part of what we're doing is doing that, because in the Indian River Lagoon, we have a treatment plant that spits out hot water. And that hot water is what attracts all the manatees. But because of our nutrient leaching, we have killed off a lot of the seagrass, which is their food source. Now, manatees are not known as the brightest animal on the planet. And so even though there is food a half mile south or a mile south of that, because the water's warmer near the treatment plant exit, they won't move. And so that's what's causing a lot of the manatees starving and dying. And so what we need to do to stop this entire cascade of issues is we have a program now that's going to prohibit any new septic tanks in the Merritt Island Refuge area, the Indian River Lagoon Basin Management Action Area, all of that starting in 2025, and then in 2030, everyone has to be converted to make sure that we quit leaching any macronutrients into the Mosquito Lagoon. Secondarily, we have a number of what I like, which are these oyster reclamation programs, because oysters can clean thousands of gallons of water a day. It's incredible. And so if you have now incentivized oyster and clam farming, all of these mollusks are actually cleaning the water just as fast as most of the other stuff we can do. Plus, it provides another economic development source. And so if we get rid of the point source, which are your septic tanks, we put in the oysters and make sure that we're cleaning the water that's there. Then we replant some of the seagrass that's there. We can begin to recover that entire ecosystem, and then we don't have an issue with the manatees anymore. And so a lot of this is really to improve the fishing, improve the water quality, improve everything that would take it back to what we were doing, 50 years ago there. And really it starts with making sure that we're not making the problem worse by reversing the damage that a lot of these leaching septic tanks have done.
So we had a couple of questions that were submitted earlier from it. Somebody did ask about the TCO bill. Before we get into that discussion, if you could put in the comments or just send a quick message on making sure that was the construction defects bill that you're talking about, or if it's a different bill. Just want to make sure we're talking about the right thing. So let's talk about the other question that was one of the other questions that was submitted that deals with EV chargers and the charging system in Florida. There's a lot of money coming in from the federal government on this project as well. I know I've heard from the state DOT talk about how critical it is for us to build our charger network. Talk a little bit about how is the state working to address building up our charger network in Florida?
So great question, because there are a lot of transportation questions we have right now, given the heightened awareness around resiliency. And so for us, in order to make citizens comfortable with what they're buying, we need to make sure that we have enough EV chargers for evacuation routes. One of the things that is prohibiting a lot of what we're doing at the state level in terms of pushing all this stuff is that we don't want to have, 30% of the market have electric vehicles and then half of them run out of juice because there aren't enough charging stations up I-75 when we're all trying to get out of the way of a hurricane. So a lot of what we're doing is kind of this chicken and the egg of where's the appropriate place to start? How do we start? What do we do? How can we better prepare ourselves for what is a coming resiliency project and do it in a way that makes sense? With the money being available at the federal government, there's always this, well, what's the best way to spend it? We want to do it for highest and best use. We want to make sure it's market driven. We are trying to be as productive as we can in terms of making sure that there isn't one kind of a facility that's getting it. Like, what would happen if we said, well, we'll just put them at gas stations? Well, then Racetrack says, no, we want them at ours. And Wawa says, no, we want them at ours. We say, no, everybody gets them. And they go, well, then I don't want them because it's going to clog up and I get no revenue. So there's all these questions about how infrastructure wise we do it. And I think that's what the holdup is you've got industry fights of those who would normally fuel cars. You've got planning fights of how it is that we think about resiliency and evacuation during hurricanes. We've got and as soon as we go, well, 25% of the market is electric vehicles, DOT is going to go, well, then who's going to pay for our roads because nobody's paying gas tax anymore? And how do we collect gas tax? And they go, well, Texas just did a flat fee. And we go, we got a lot of retired people, and that's a regressive tax for people who don't drive very much. The beauty of the gas tax right now is it taxes you per exactly for how much you use roads. Every time you empty a tank, you pay a gas tax. If we charged a flat fee to everyone, people who took their kids to school every morning and drove to work and then were soccer coach and all that kind of stuff would be getting away with more than the elderly person who drives twice a week to the grocery store if they paid the same thing. And so all of those questions are swirling right now about how we do it. We want to get there, but we want to do it in a manner that's fair to all parties involved. And that takes a lot of coordination.
Gotcha. So let's talk a little bit about what we think is the TCO bill that you talked about, because this does affect a lot of anybody who's putting in solar panels on a house, those sorts of stuff. It's a construction defib bill. Very quickly, because we only have a couple of more minutes here, and tell a little bit about what that. Can you give a 20-second, 30-second kind of here's what this does for?
Sure.
For
so
what
we find happening in the state of Florida is that we have a property insurance crisis, and in that property insurance crisis, you've got a number of insurance companies who are not paying claims that people think they should be paying. Well, when that happens, they are looking then to recover money from anywhere, and they end up suing a lot of contractors for it. And that then creates a lot of legal trouble for those that in 49 other states wouldn't have this problem. And so part of what this bill was is to align us with all the other states to say, you have a reasonable amount of time to recover from what would be a construction defect, but we don't want to make this the backstop because you have a terrible insurance company who's not paying you and you're just looking to recover because you need new floors and you don't care who pays for them. We get that. And so this says, let's tighten that time frame to an actual construction defect. It shouldn't be 12 years for you to figure out you have a leaky roof. Probably figure that out in 5, if not 3 months, especially during the summer. And so this would seem to be a reasonable solution to shrink that down, to continue to put reasonable pressure on the insurance companies that it really is their responsibility. And a lot of the bills that we've done over the last 18 months, including special sessions, is really starting to tighten up that insurance market so that we have major carriers looking to return to Florida, which then is going to put price pressure down because you've got more competitors. And so what we're doing is working. It just is going to take a little bit more time. And this was kind of an ancillary or an add-on to making sure we continue to put pressure on those insurance companies to pay their claims that they really should be paying in the first place and not put contractors on the hook for that.
Well, those were the 2 questions that were submitted in advance before we got started on here. We've got just a minute real quick. I know it's off topic, but you were quoted in the New York Times this week for for the prescription bill. I know and you're very, very proud of that. So give 1 minute and then we're going to say thank you and move on.
Sure. Thanks for that. So by trade, I come from the healthcare industry and specifically the drug industry. And there are pharmacy benefit managers, PBMs, who long ago added value to the supply chain from the manufacturer to the wholesaler to the pharmacy to the consumer. And now they don't seem to add as much. When you have companies like Amazon and Netflix out there that seamlessly can integrate information, you don't really need a third-party contractor to tell you when somebody got a prescription and when they didn't. Publix can do that right at the scanner. And so they were adding all of these costs through things called spread pricing, through things called steering. And so we are now holding them accountable in the state of Florida, which should shine a bright light in the black box of drug pricing and help squeeze out all of those players in the supply chain that weren't adding any value. I have no problem paying for a good or a service if they're adding value. I do have a problem if you've got 3 or 4 middlemen that aren't adding any value. They just got their hands in the cookie jar. And so this, I think, is going to help an enormous number of seniors, consumers, and could become a template and should become a template for the rest of the country. Several other states have tried this. They have been sued in federal court for violating ERISA. We were very, very specific and intentional about not violating ERISA based off of an Arkansas law. And so I think ours will end up being a template for the country and might be why we hit the New York Times this week. So that was great.
Well, Senator, thank you very much for your time today. I know this was a very quick talk. We could probably talk about the session a lot longer, but at this point in time, we just want to appreciate it. If there's anything we can do, my email address is on the screen right now. Please let me know. Again, thank you also to the Lake Economic Area Development Partnership and LEAD and Ben for your work here. And we look forward to talking with you soon. And with that, I appreciate everybody's being here today and look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you very much, everyone.